Welcome to the Your Message Received podcast. And now, taking your message to the finish line, your host, John Duffin.
Hey folks, John Duffin here, Duffin Media. Welcome back to another episode of Your Message Received. Your Message Received is the home, the place, the platform to find your best, most true, most authentic business voice. Your most authentic voice we'll go with. How about that? Get what you want, find what you need, improve your results, find the person of your dream, make billions of dollars. You may not find those last two guaranteed from me, but we'll help get you there. And we love that you keep joining us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartMedia. We're thrilled that you are here, and we love that you're checking us out on the video and the audio versions of the program as well, too. I am thrilled to be back, and I'm really, really happy that I get to introduce a friend of mine today. So, right off the bat, I'm going to try to impress this person right away. Rich Negrin. I try to roll my R's to get it right. Do it again.
Negrin.
Negrin.
But Negrin is fine. You know, there's a long line of school teachers and coaches who haven't been able to do that my whole life. It's okay.
Folks, I'm going to get to that part in a minute. So I worked with Univision for literally 12 plus years. Spanish language communications monster. And the fact of the matter is, the biggest compliment I ever got, ever, when I was with that company was from my senior regional president, who said to me once, and I mean once, John, that was a great R roll that you did.
Yeah, if you can roll your R's, John, you're halfway there, man.
That was, to me, that was what I worked on for 12 years. But
John, you know what I call that? I call rolling your R's putting a little salsa in it. That's what I say.
I love it. Well, folks, Rich Negrin happens to be Pennsylvania's Secretary of the Department of Environmental Protection, otherwise known as DEP, the first Latino to serve in the role. So the fact of the matter is, we're going to talk about a number of things today. Environmental justice being one of them. It's so important to me that I would have interviewed Rich on the last series of professions that he's had. But for me, this is even more important, and I'm biased as a Pennsylvania resident. Look, before DEP, Rich served as the Vice President of Regulatory Policy and Strategy, also the head of External Affairs at Commonwealth Edison. Clean energy regulatory policies, working to encourage the use of renewable energy. And folks, obviously, you're hearing this every day, multiple times a day, how important this is. I knew Rich when he was in town, not just running for district attorney, but as serving as the deputy mayor, the city manager for the city of Philadelphia, a giant in the field, in the world of communications, in politics, in grassroots initiatives. Also, an NFL baller, which I always loved.
Yeah, a long time ago, John, long time ago.
Cleveland Browns, New York Jets, Wagner College University grad, and that's just the beginning of it. Rich, I'm glad you're here, man. I'm really glad you're here.
Oh, John, it is such a pleasure. You know, I've never been on your podcast before. I've heard it several times, and I want to tell you, I always thought the energy that you bring was just something you reserved for me when we met in public. But now I see it's something that you bring everywhere you go, especially your podcast. Your intro got me very excited. I think I'm going to become a billionaire and find the person of my the special person of my life, all because of you, John. And that's better than fixing the environment, and I think that's harder.
I'm going to say. Yeah. The reason we do all of that is because we bring people who walk the walk like Rich. And I have been such a fan and a friend. Rich has lived in Chicago, which is one of my favorite places in America. But it's even better that he's back in our neck of the woods in Pennsylvania. So folks, I'm always biased. If you're listening to me from outside of this region, and I know a number of people do, you hear me always speak fondly of Philadelphia and the state of Pennsylvania. And so for me, one of the gifts of living here was getting to meet Rich. And I think Rich's story is incredibly powerful. I think of Rich as a fighter. And when we talk about the arc of authenticity, it's for me, one of the people that have helped me is Rich in the ability to be able to speak his mind, but in a very graceful, dignified way. And I always found that really impressive. You've had to fight like hell for a lot of things. You've had to fight like hell personally, professionally, and we'll get to all of that stuff. I'm going to walk backwards before we walk forwards, but Rich literally is a dad, a husband, a grandfather, which makes me laugh because you're too young, man.
Yeah.
And I find that so damn impressive. And I also know too that you've had a hell of a story in regards to growing up and the reasons why fighting for human rights, fighting for gun violence, all of that stuff matters so much. I don't like prying, but you gave me the green light, so I'll be glad to at least ask the question and the reasons why. As you were younger and you've endured certain things, do you mind sharing a little bit in regards to the reasons?
No, please, happy to. I think it's important for us to tell our stories, right? And I think it not only inspires folks, it inspires me sometimes. It's helpful to remind ourselves of where we've come from, and the ability to tell these stories. And in many ways, the most difficult challenges that I faced throughout my life, both as a young person, and we can talk about a couple different ones, and obviously are the reason why I am where I am, right? That those difficulties, if there's one big lesson, I think, from kind of the Rich Negrin story, is that many of those things that were intended to be disruptive or negative, or in some cases could have been incredibly destructive experiences for me, including things that were life-threatening that we can talk about.
Yeah.
Are the reason I'm sitting here fighting for other folks. So I'll start at the beginning, John, which I think is really related to where I am from an environmental perspective. I grew up I was born in Newark, New Jersey, very challenged kind of urban setting. Grew up in a small area of Elizabeth, New Jersey called Port Elizabeth, which is right off exit 13 when you're going down the turnpike on your way to New York. And I lived literally right between my neighborhood, those couple blocks that were my entire life until I was around 10 or 11, was between an oil refinery, a junkyard, a funeral parlor, and the New Jersey Turnpike, and a railroad yard that went right behind our house. And so you talk about environmental justice and the communities that are impacted, whether it's our zoning laws or redlining, which discriminated and systemically against people of color in certain neighborhoods and kept them in certain neighborhoods. Or if you look at the fact that, that refinery was literally half a block from where I grew up, that they don't put those refineries in certain neighborhoods, but they put them in mine, right? And that's what environmental justice kind of starts to scratch the surface of. But that's where I grew up. I grew up in a community that looked like that. And John, because we're friends, at the age of 13, my father was an extraordinary individual, and he had been working with the State Department and some others in the Cuban community. I'm Cuban by background. My family, both my dad and my mom, fled communism so that I could have the kind of freedoms that I enjoy today here in the United States. So they fled Cuba on the heels of the communist revolution in the early 1960s. And then my parents met here at a very young age and married and had my sister and I. My father had worked with the State Department to help release 3,000 political prisoners that were in Cuban prisons. So if you recall, John, those folks that predated us, right, from the Bay of Pigs, many of them were in jail. The Cuban prisons, there's no free speech, there's no civil rights, there's no due process. If you look at someone the wrong way, if they think you're talking to somebody the wrong way, you can get locked up for almost any reason, or just because you're not loyal to the party. So my dad helped negotiate the release of 3,000 political prisoners that were living in horrific conditions in Cuban prisons. Because he had done that at a very young age, and I was just a child who really didn't know what was going on, he was targeted by a radical right-wing terrorist group called Omega 7. and my dad was murdered, assassinated, shot dead in front of me while he and I, and there's a connection to football here that you talked about. He was supposed to be driving me. That was a Sunday morning. He was driving me to the first Pop Warner kind of midget league football game. He was going to watch me play, playoff game. And as we were getting into the car, a vehicle went by, two men wearing ski masks in a stolen car, shooting a MAC-10 machine gun out the window, sprayed the entire street. But I ducked down. Bullets narrowly missed me up where I was standing as a young man. I was 12 years old at the time. Bullets were wedged inside of the vehicle where I was supposed to be sitting just in a few seconds. You know, the old cars that had that little steel button that you had to flip in order to flip the front seat forward so you could get into the back.
Sure.
Saved my life, right? Like it stuck and it didn't move very quickly. And I ducked down, bent down to kind of play with that thing. And the bullets flew right over where my head had been, all across, and narrowly missed me. And they sprayed the entire street with, you know, MAC-10 is really, it is a gun that is really about mass casualties and not really sharp aiming. It's a spray, a machine gun, and they sprayed literally hundreds of rounds throughout the street where I was standing, and I was fortunate to survive. When I looked in you know, to the front seat of the car to check on my dad, he had not made it into the car. So I came around the side of the vehicle, walked around the back of the car, and found my dad in the street. And you know, John, in a moment of horror, right, and in a moment of shock that far too many of our children face today, which is why I talk about it, because I want kids to know that they're not alone, that this doesn't make me special. A lot of our young people are living in these environments, and they see these things almost every day. My dad was actually not concerned about himself. He was on the ground bleeding, looking for me. And I could see the look of relief on his face when he saw that I was okay. I saw him look me up and down as he was bleeding out in the street, and I saw him relax. He tried to speak. I held him. He tried to speak and was unable to, as a major artery was hit in his neck, and the blood was flowing freely from his mouth. But you know, that's what I remember, right? I remember the blood. I remember the incident. But more importantly, that incident is and what happened around that case, John. You know, I wasn't wealthy. We grew up poor. It was the first time I met a lawyer who was prosecuting the group that had murdered my dad. And the dream in my head about, hey, maybe you can do that, right? Maybe you can help somebody else who's been a victim, or, you know, it brings you, when you experience that kind of early childhood trauma, the ability to look at that and have empathy for young people has driven my career my entire life. And, you know, really important for our young people and many folks to know that it's those hardships and those crosses and those difficulties that we think hold us down, that may be the thing that lift us up. And you know, I always say when we face that kind of adversity, we either get better or we get bitter. And you know, I chose to get better as a result, and not bitter. And really an important story, and really a big part of my personal journey, and really why I'm sitting here today.
Rich, when do you think, because obviously this is a process back then, when did you think you made the process to get better? How long do you think it took you to come to that realization?
Not very long, because, you know, I think there's the usual healing time and the grief and the stages of that we all do.
Right.
We have a significant loss. But for me, it was all about teams and football. It was that brotherhood, right? I joke around my office here at DEP that we're all broken, right? All of us are broken in kind of a unique way. And sometimes it's those missing gaps and feelings that we had that we fill for each other, right? Sometimes the cracks in the vase are where the light shines through, right? We've all heard that quote. And for me, it was really football. Kept me off the street, kept me focused, kept me going to school. I think there was times I only went to school sometimes because I wanted to remain football eligible, you know, besides talking to the girls, right? So for me, I think football played that healing component to me, where there was a sense of belonging that it gave me, where I was a part of a brotherhood. I look for that same sense of belonging in the teams that I build today, right? Mm-hmm. We don't care about each other. I talk about Team DEP, and I talk about our DEP family every single day with my folks. And if we don't care for each other and love for each other and trust each other and build the right kind of culture here, we're not going to be able to do the biggest thing that I've ever tried to do in my entire life. And that is make sure that we're safe around our environment, make sure that we're keeping public safety at the foremost, and that we're making sure that we're here to combat all of the extreme challenges that we're facing around climate change that I hope to talk about a little bit more.
Oh, you can count on that last part of what you said. The answer is yeah, please. But the first part is I'm curious. As you said, not that long before you went from, like I said, from to better. When you were playing, were you a different football player after that? Did your mind change in regards to the way you practiced, performed, thought, lived your, like, what was that like then? I'll get to now, but then what was it like? How did you channel it?
It was more important than kind of individual motivation. I've heard the story about the Navy SEALs,
right?
And it's so true, because I think it bears real accuracy with my experience. And I'm not going to compare football to the Navy SEALs, because I think they're very, very different. But there are some aspects that are true. Our coaches and our leaders try to break us first in order to build you up and make you better. And I think the SEALs do. I heard this great story. I think it was the executive leader, Simon Sinek, who talks about it a little bit, where when you look at who makes it in the Navy SEALs, and especially SEAL Team 6, the most elite group in the entire world, they said you would think it's the guys who are in great shape. You would think it's like the high school football players. You would think it's these guys who are full of testosterone and muscle heads or this or that. And it's not. He said sometimes it's the skinny guys, but it's the guys that when they are broken, that mm-hmm. when the process of what they're taking them through, stop thinking about themselves and think about the guy next to them. Mm-hmm. And those guys generally lift themselves up in order to be there for their colleague, in order to be there for their friend. That the sheer pain of what they're going through, whether it's Hell Week or something else, is mitigated, is somehow muted, because they're concerned for their brother next to them. So to me, that's really what this is all about, right? Like that ability, and it's been true for me my entire life, my ability to play and be the leader that my folks deserve, to be fully authentic, to your point, and to be totally engaged, to be willing to be vulnerable around my shortcomings and my blind spots, and hire for that, like hire folks around who make me better and make my team better. And making sure that I'm setting the pace, right? Like we have a saying around here that my folks make fun of me about, where I say #PlayFaster, because the great players always play faster. And being able, we can fail fast and keep moving and just keep making progress, but we've got to do it fast and not be afraid to fail. And that's a sea change around here, right? In government, you're under a microscope. But in the city of Philadelphia, I was under a microscope every single day. And we were doing incredibly innovative, creative things, especially in our communities. And I was okay with moving quickly and readjusting and adapting as you go, because you can get so much done if you're able to do that, right? And do it together. So to me, it really is. That was the lesson that I think I learned, is that there are folks around you who are supporting you, who love you. There was always a critical person in my life at the right time, whether it was the right teacher or the right coach. If you're a spiritual person, God will put these people in your path, right? And just when you need them. And sometimes it's the words of a stranger, right? Which sometimes you find that support and that comfort in any number of places. I saw, John, we'll talk about it a little bit if you want.
Yeah, please.
That just this week with the disaster that just happened in Plum, Pennsylvania, with the home that was entirely destroyed by a catastrophic gas explosion. And and I was having this conversation with some of the families who were there, who were impacted, about how, the thing I always say is, look at the heroes, right? Mr. Rogers said that over every big catastrophe. I saw those heroes myself on Monday in that community, whether it was my time city government, Amtrak 188 disaster, whether it was the building collapse that we had on Market Street, whether it was all those times where, we've lost first responders or fallen officers or firefighters. We've had crisis after crisis after crisis, and this job is really no different. And I saw that on Monday. But every time you see amazing people, especially here in Pennsylvania, they're extraordinary folks who step up to make a difference in people's lives. And just like those Navy SEALs, they're typically getting through it by helping others first. And that's what I saw on Monday.
So let me ask you about Monday. Since we're here, I do want to know something like, so how long from, you talk about fast, how long from the disaster, like it was you got there, literally, you personally showed up with your team. I know it wasn't you by yourself, but I mean, you showed up exactly, what was the timeline from disaster to you?
Yeah. So when you have an important, incredibly sort of once in a lifetime type disaster happen in a community like that, right? The first thing you do is there's sort of the rescue situation. You've got first responders rushing there. So we're emergency responders on the DEP side, but we don't show up right away like that. We stay out of the way of that, right? Mm-hmm. So we're making sure we're there. We're on the scene, by the way, almost the same day, within 24 hours. We're there 12 hours, really. So the incident happened over the weekend. We were there right away, but we hang back. And I'm not there yet because I'm going to be a huge distraction if I show up, right? So a big part of what I can do is don't get there right away while you're still in that sort of rescue phase at the beginning. Then the next couple of days, depending on the scenario and the incident, are typically what I call sometimes, unfortunately, kind of the recovery period where you're when you're rescuing, you hope there's people that are still alive. You're determining what happened. You're determining safety for others. That's a live, active event that you're dealing with. And then it slowly transitions to the recovery phase where the emergency is over. We know that we've got everything under control in terms of, all the gas pipes are shut down. We know that the problem's not going to happen again, but now we're sort of in a recovery phase. And that's really where the long-term investigation begins. And that's where we start to step up as DEP. So my stray gas team was out there really on day one, but didn't really get activated until probably the Monday or Tuesday, really the Monday, right after a few days after the incident, because that's the right time for us. I didn't get there until the following Monday. So I gave my team a week to really make some progress, to really do what they need to do in terms of their investigation, collecting samples. So what we're trying to figure out here is this community deserves to know what caused this explosion and are they safe? And that's my role, right? The first responders are doing their job. The police are doing their job. Actually, there was an extraordinary police officer, one I mentioned, Detective Renko, who lived 5 houses down from one of the homes. His young child, 7-year-old boy, was blown off his feet when the explosion occurred. Officer Renko nearly lost his life, risked his life to run into that fire, pulled out the last victim who unfortunately passed away on Wednesday. But they had to pull him literally, John, out of the fire by the belt in order to get him out of there, because he knew these folks. They were his neighbors. His children played with Keegan, who was the 12-year-old that we lost in that home. A horrific story. So those are the folks I'm talking about. I'm talking about heroes like Detective Renko. I'm talking about heroes like the Fire Marshal Bruckner, who is just walking in the rubble every single day, collecting it, learning those facts. I've got my team and they're walking in the rubble every day, taking samples of gas, both at potential points of sources all around the area, 18 locations, to see if we can match. Gas itself, methane, has a molecular signature. So we're able to, like a fingerprint, kind of a CSI moment, is to try to match gas samples that we've taken around the home to different points of gas, sources of gas throughout the region, as near as a couple hundred yards away, as near as a sample underneath the home, underneath the foundation, as far away as 1.5 miles. And that's a big part of what we're doing right now. So those results typically take up to 1.5 months to 2 months. And the governor has asked me, one short conversation, me and him, to expedite those results. So we're going to start seeing results on those tests, hopefully by the end of this week, tomorrow or Saturday. So we can start to hopefully put the pieces of the puzzle together on what may have caused this. I think it's the beginning of that puzzle, kind of the first step in that puzzle, which we'll get over the next few days. But here's the other thing that's really important, John, that I want to make sure that this is sort of the human side of this. That's sort of the DEP component of this.
Right.
But I'm also a human being. And I was there and I was talking to Detective Renko, and he's telling me about his kids. And he's got this little angel, this little ginger 4-year-old girl named Avery, who made this bracelet for me.
Hey, folks, if you're listening, then I encourage you to watch. So I'm looking at the Plum Strong. Wow, a beautiful friendship bracelet. That's more than friendship. That's a powerful gift to give somebody.
Yeah. This little girl makes me this bracelet, and they were handing them out for the community. And it's just an example. And Detective Renko is telling me about Avery and his 2 boys, and about the fact that he's got to put them to bed every night. And his kids have lots of questions because, the last thing they saw was their dad running into a fire.
Right.
So this is an incredibly traumatic thing for this community. And every home, there are 13 homes that are uninhabitable there now as a result of this blast. So it's not just about these 3 homes that have been destroyed and this one entire family that's been destroyed and lost. It's impacting this entire community. And he's telling me about these children and their inability to go to sleep, and he's trying to calm them down and make sure that they know it can't happen. They're afraid it's going to happen to them while they're asleep at night.
I was going to say, how do you promise somebody that it's not like that? Just seems to be like an impossible challenge,
We're having this conversation, and I say to him, because I know, and he didn't, I go, do you guys have a methane detector in your house?
Okay.
And he said, no, I don't. And I go, does anybody in this community? He goes, I've never heard of that before. We don't have those in this community. John, because I'm the Secretary of DEP,
right.
and I don't regulate these guys. The Pennsylvania Utility Commission regulates the utility companies in the region. I asked our corporate sector and those communities, those corporations engaged in this community, to put a methane detector in every single home in this community, 227 homes in this community. And within a few hours, I got a commitment and a conversation with Olympus Energy where they promised to do just that. Those detectors are scheduled to start going in the next few days. I got to call Detective Renko up Monday night and tell him that we're going to be able to put a detector into his kid's home by the end of the week. And he's able to tell that to his children so that they can just be a little bit safer and have a little bit more peace of mind. When I tell you that I have rarely seen a tough, hard-nosed law enforcement officer become emotional, and the fact that I wanted the company to distribute those to us, and we were going to help get those to him, and he was going to help distribute those out personally to his neighbors that he knows. That's what it's all about, right? That's the human. That answers your question around, like, what do you do to make people feel a little safer? Those things cost roughly $100 each, right? $25,000 to give a community that is in pain, that needs our support, some sense of peace and for these children. His one son was talking to me. I was talking to him. There's a picture online that you can see if you follow my account at Rich Negrin, where I'm sitting there talking to these young boys, and he had number 40 on his cheek painted.
Okay.
Talking to me about how his dad was telling him how I played football, just like you just did.
Yeah.
He was telling me he played hockey, and I said to him, "Is that your number? Are you number 40?" And he said, "No, that was Keegan's number. That was Keegan.
I got you.
That was who we lost. Keegan used to play with them on the street, right? He's the this young man is about 7 or 8 years old, and Keegan was 12, and he was the football player on the street that he looked up to and played catch with." So having been that 12-year-old football player in my life at some point, that really resonated with me. And that's really what it's about. It's about having that empathy. I know you talk about it from a leadership perspective and authenticity. It's about bringing that to this role every single day.
Rich, I got a couple of follow-up questions on that. It's an observation, because when I was asking you how soon, I think it's important for you to lay out these timelines. I think that was really important to lay out what the process is, because a couple of just rando examples that it's the situation in Plum is closer to home to me than Maui or a number of horrible crisis situations that have all taken place. And I feel like now they're coming up so damn fast and so frequently. But what I was going to say is this: I bring up the Maui example because of two quotes that I saw. Whether it was political talk show, whatever, yapping about how long it took, and that's why I was bringing up the fast, how long it took President Biden to get there. I remember that. And then I remember it was either the governor or the senator from Maui that literally said within 6 hours of President Biden's arrival, we had everything that we needed. Within 6 hours. So I think it's important to remind people that you could take the first plane and show up, or train, or whatever. You could do that and jump in front of a camera. But the fact of the matter is, fast is, as you said, we had people there that day. And then we were doing, like, literally saving lives, going through, making sure that no more was going to occur. And then you go through that. And then within a week, I was there. And then I could do the human interest things, problem solve, tangible solutions like okay, so I'm so not a scientist. What were the devices that you put in? No, I'm
yeah.
I was terrible at science. So as I said, so it's like, here's a reminder.
Yeah.
But
they look just like your basic fire alarm, right? They're this small, right? Exactly.
Yeah, but this is what I'm saying. So $20-something thousand in actual hard cost is done, and everything moves fast. So I just, like, for me, in regards to effectiveness, leadership is also understanding what an actual process is, and that's why I was
John, you also, and it's an incredibly important and astute question on your part, because here's what I'll tell you in terms of my thinking. It is unconscionable for a president or a governor or a leader to be holding a press event while they're pulling bodies out of rubble. Like, it is disrespectful. It is inappropriate. There are hundreds of people unaccounted for in Hawaii. He had to wait some reasonable amount of time before he went out there. Like, they're literally, people are still holding out hope at some point for their loved ones.
Did you find them, right? That's why I feel like it's important, because one of the things that I think about is whether it was government in Philadelphia, whether it was your current, the current position with DEP, it's the sense of the timelines and the expectations of those around you. One of the things that I found amazing when you were here was, as I said, that ability to do all of that tightrope walking. When you were able to be here, you're a negotiator. You've also got to be a tough guy. You've got to be a problem solver. You've got to be a brain, and you've got to know when to flip all those switches. And for me, I guess a question would be: was there ever a time where you fired off the wrong response and were sorry about it?
Yeah, not really on the emergency side. You know what we screwed up, John, on a regular basis? Everyday stuff. Yeah, like Mayor Nutter and I would laugh about this all the time, and I say it about him all the time. He was at his best, and I learned a lot of this from him.
Right.
When things were at their worst, right? Yeah. That's like to watch him behind the scenes, the stuff you didn't see that was public. On almost every major weather event, we over communicated. You got to tell people 5 to 7 times before they kind of get it. We want people to stay in and be safe. So we did a lot of that stuff. But the stuff that we didn't get right, I think is sort of the everyday knucklehead stuff that every now and then, we're like, yeah, maybe we should have done that differently. And you learn and you move on, and you can't be afraid of making those mistakes. If you're not making some mistakes, and hopefully they're not, very few mistakes are fatal. And you don't make too many on the public safety side, because that matters. And that represents people's lives, right?
How weird. Right. And it was why I asked you that, was more not questioning your decisions. It's the emotions. I remember I didn't know. Like, I found what I found when I knew, I'm like, I have to know him better. I have to talk to him more. Was after a tough moment, but a professional tough moment. And I remember watching you and I was mesmerized. And it was one of the few times where it was like, I wanted you to have a different result than you got, which was when you ran for district attorney. And I bring that up, not just to pull that out of the sky.
Thank God I lost. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in this role, right?
You wouldn't be here helping people to this magnitude and degree, right? But what I remembered seeing that night, I'm there at the press conference. And I don't think I've ever been at certainly not for you, but for, I don't know, for anybody, a political, like win or lose. I'd never been to one, right? And I can remember I'm there with Univision and bothering the news team, and I don't know why I'm there, but as I said, but I'm there anyway, because I'm your friend. That's why I was there. And I remember you coming out with your family, and I'll never forget this. I could feel I don't know if it was anger, but you weren't the typical politician that everything's great and this feels great. I mean, you gave a very classy response. It wasn't like that, but you could feel like the emotion, and I could almost see like your teeth grit. And I remember thinking, it's like, oh, he ain't coming back. He ain't coming back. He's literally, it's like he's angry, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Whether he's going to take, like, I didn't know where it was going to go from there. And I think about how this has all unfolded and how insignificant that was, that it was like, I'm like, oh my God, we're never going to see this guy's just going to like take his ball and go home. And it's like, and meanwhile, two questions. Number one, was I right in the observation where you were more hot than him?
I think what you sensed was accurate, but I don't think it was anger.
Okay.
There was a lot of disappointment, I think, in terms of what I thought it meant for the city.
Yeah.
I was upset about that. I was one of the few candidates who I thought tried to, when the George Soros money came in and hit in a big way, roughly whatever it was, 1.5 million, and then eventually 3 million. And we knew that was going to make the election incredibly challenging, and that they're basically going to try to buy the election, which is kind of what happened. The big concern that I had was, and because my time, those 7 years as city manager and working in our communities, was that folks didn't understand what it meant for the city. We had made progress. The homicide rate had been dropped in 5 years, 38%. We had a 40-year low on violent crime, almost a 50% reduction. And I knew that was all over. Like, all that work that we had done, it wasn't just about me being DA. So what? That's about me. I'm disappointed. I'll walk away. Well, I wasn't angry about that. What I was angry was about those little kids that I spent time in those communities that we talked about in our Philly Rising neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Who were impacted, right? The kids that I would talk to about gun violence and the trauma that I saw as a kid, that these kids were all going to continue to see, because I was afraid that the outcomes were going to be worse than they were when we were there. And unfortunately, I've been somewhat proven prophetic in what's happened over the last several years. In light of what's happened around those things, I think this past year we hit something like a 25-30 year high in homicides, and 100 more annually in Philadelphia than we had those kind of 3 or 4 years in a row, where we had this great dream team of great folks, and it's not just about me. It was about a great mayor who understood it and was fully engaged in the community. Charles Ramsey, by all accounts, the greatest police commissioner in the entire country, America's police commissioner, an amazing chief of staff, Everett Gillison. Everett was a public defender when I was a young DA, and we knew and respected each other and had gone against each other in the courtroom. And then now we got to work together to help make a city safer. So what I think, without talking too much about it, because all that,
to dwell on it, it was simply
for me, it was the anger about that felt like I knew something that other folks didn't know, and that they were all about to find out.
that because like that vision. I knew it was messed up. I knew it, but I didn't know why it was messed up. I don't mean you personally. I meant the situation was messed up. But it got you an opportunity hits, and then you get a chance to go to Chicago. And literally in Chicago, through Exelon, through Commonwealth Edison, it's you get the chance to get such amazing energy experience now, like that has now come into play. What were some?
It goes back further, and it's you're exactly right. Like, I was really fortunate, but it goes back further. After I left the DA's office when I was a young lawyer, to work at a large law firm there in Philly, Morgan Lewis.
Yep.
My first big client was Pico Energy at Morgan.
Mm-hmm.
My second big client was Exelon, right? The biggest clean energy company in the entire country. I started working on the regulatory side and really helping those companies in terms of what they make sure they were trying to electrify, make the grid more resilient. I arbitrated a case for them, 20 years ago about smart meter technology that helped people get better service to their homes. So I started learning about the environment, the importance of clean energy all the way back then. Folks just didn't see that part because it was me in the private sector working at a law firm doing a lot of that work. Then my time as city manager is when we really launched under Mayor Nutter the Greenworks program. So I think I was the first city manager to put an EV charging station in our fleet department and start to buy EV vehicles all the way back when we were there. Gosh, that was 8-9 years ago, right? It's popular now, but we were the first to do it.
And then,
so I've always been interested in not just public safety and gun violence because of my personal experience. I've been interested in the environment my entire career, and I've been interested in voting rights my entire career because I think that's critical, especially to us, those of us in the Latino community who don't turn out to vote. So when Josh called me and pitched me with the opportunity to serve the people of Pennsylvania around what I think is the quintessential, most pressing issue of our time, which is climate and the environment,
right?
Was an obvious answer.
Rich, when you were in Chicago, did you think you were going to stay in Chicago?
No, me, John, I'm kind of a turnaround guy. I think that's what folks forget. I was on the board of ethics in Philadelphia where I met Michael Nutter. I had never worked on a campaign. I didn't really work closely with him. And we got to know each other because he really kind of submitted 3 ethics bills that we had to work closely with as a member of the ethics board. And that's where he and I got to know each other.
Mm-hmm.
He brought me into city government to help clean things up. And I helped do that right over those years. So I gained this reputation. You remember it was the BRT first.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yep.
He asked me to clean up. There was some corruption. There were some IG investigations. I went in there, turned all that around in about 6 months, and then he named me city manager and asked me to do the same thing. Chicago was really about that for me as well.
Turning a situation around.
Yeah, the company had gotten in trouble. They had some reputational issues. There were under investigation. They had a brand new CEO who was looking to clean things up, a lot like Mayor Nutter was when he came into city government. A CEO named Joe Dominguez, who's an extraordinary leader. And it still took him, John, a year to talk me into moving out to Chicago. It took a year of me working with them as a consultant before I said yes, and he really wanted me to come in-house and really help him do that. So I knew when I went out there that there's often a finite time when you're coming in sort of the cleanup guy and you're trying to change the culture and build a team and kind of resurrect an organization, much like I'm doing here at DEP. You often do that. You burn bright, you burn hot, and you often burn out pretty quickly. So I don't know that I burned out, but my work there was clearly done, and it was time for me to move on to the next challenge and the opportunity to come back home to Pennsylvania and a challenge even bigger than that, right? Something that's worthwhile that I can really. I feel like, and I tell my folks this all the time. And this conversation kind of lays it bare for everybody who's listening. That I feel like I've been preparing my whole life for this role, and that this is the most important role that I could have possibly have chosen because of the scope and the impact.
Rich, so you get to join Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania.
Governor in the country.
Oh my God, right? And are aligned as the Secretary of Pennsylvania's Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, which, by the way, and I'm embarrassed to say this, bad at science. And apparently, I didn't know what DEP was, what they do. I mean, the problems, you know what I mean? Like I said, again, the climate change, like the problems are horrific and real. But walk me through a little bit what is done. Like how?
So we're the regulatory oversight agency, but we're a lot more than that. So if you're manufacturing, utilizing, transporting dangerous chemicals or hazardous chemicals, we're going to permit that stuff. We're going to make sure you're doing it in the safest manner. We're going to make sure you're utilizing best practices. We're going to utilize the power and authority, our regulatory authority over our permitting, to make sure that you're doing all of those things well. When you fail short, when you contaminate the environment, we're going to be there to hold you accountable. So there's both a proactive approach and a reactive approach that's there. Hopefully we are more proactive than reactive because we want to prevent the situations like you saw out in Plum and others, where there was the train derailment, which really happened in my first week.
Palestine, right? So
what we do is that's us. We're regulating those agencies, those companies, those communities. If you're going to impact groundwater, if you're going to do construction, if you want to build, if you have a small gas station who wants to build a storage facility and you're going to move ground that may impact groundwater or impact a stream, you're going to have to deal with DEP in a way that we make sure that we allow you to do what you do. But also protect the environment at the same time. We don't have the ability. I think some folks sometimes give us too much responsibility around the ability to deny people a permit on the basis of we don't like what they're doing, whether it's fracking or something else or some other fuel. We can't really do that just from a legal perspective. But what we can do is to make sure that we have the oversight from a regulatory perspective, that it's being mitigated. Any potential risk is being mitigated, and that you're doing those activities as safe as possible. Governor Shapiro does not believe that it's one or the other, that's a false choice, that we can have a great, safe environment and spur business and be competitive and create jobs and make sure we're doing those things in a thoughtful way. I think there's folks on both sides of the aisle, both on the right side that want less regulation and folks on the left side that want more regulation. I think there's a careful balance there on how we can do this in a way that just makes sense for all of Pennsylvania. And for me, I know you know a little bit about it. It's all about Article 1, Section 27. Folks don't know, and I am saying it everywhere that I go. So that's why I'm going to interject it right here, John. And if you're born in Pennsylvania,
right,
we are one of 3 states. You have a constitutional right to clean air, pure water, and the use of the preservation of our natural resources, and that those resources are the common property of all of us, and that we, as the Commonwealth, but really all of us, are to function as the trustees of that environment, so that it stays for generations to come. This is in the language. To make sure that it's there for all of us, for the benefit of all of us. So environmental justice is right in there, right? It talks about all of us. You know, John, that when being from Philadelphia, I used to love it when I would go back past the National Constitution Center,
right,
and see that we the people on that wall.
Mm-hmm.
I would be reminded every time I saw it that when they said that, it didn't really mean all people. It meant white property owners. And there's that great Ben Franklin joke that I love to tell, when he was angry about who they were giving the right to vote nationally. And he said, if you're a man who owns a donkey and you're allowed to vote, but if you sell that donkey a few months before the election, you lose your right to vote. So who has the right, the man or the donkey? Which was a great question, right? Obviously, awesome Ben Franklin quote. Love that.
Every bit of that. You threw the term, which sounds ominous, and it's environmental justice.
Yeah.
Right? Could you clarify it a little? I know you just
it means different things, and it's a bit of a buzzword. But here's what it means for us in Pennsylvania, because of Article 1, Section 27, and then I'll talk about what it means to me. When it says all the people, when it
Mhm.
says works to the benefit of all the people, it's right there in Article 1, Section 27. They weren't thinking about environmental justice when they wrote that, but that's the effect. And that is they corrected that problem that our founding fathers screwed up. That means all of us have that right. So that means when we all know, because I think COVID laid bare that there are vulnerable communities and populations that are going to be disproportionately impacted
Absolutely.
by climate change, by systemic racism that has been in environmental equity, which is a term that we're using. So whether it's that oil refinery on my street where I grew up,
That's,
or
hey, right back to there, right to Newark. Yeah.
all the way back to Newark, right? It's all about like where are they putting their highways, because that's going to put some emissions in that community. Where the tailpipe for that 18-wheel truck is right at the height of our children that are playing in those communities, and that's why we have asthma rates that are significantly higher in those communities. That's why we suffer from COPD. That's why, John, look at the life expectancy rates between neighborhoods in big cities. I know in Chicago there was a neighborhood called Streeterville and a neighborhood in South Chicago, Bronzeville. There was a 30-year discrepancy in life expectancy between those two neighborhoods that were just 3 miles apart from each other.
Wow.
That's environmental justice. It is health outcomes. It is food deserts. It is all of those pieces working together, but it's also the environment that we create in those communities. We're not putting those roads and those railroads and those refineries and those pipelines and those fracking wells in communities of that are affluent and have the best health outcomes.
Than Rittenhouse Square. Not many, at least,
Oh, and here's the thing. It's also not an urban issue. Like we talk about it too often as an urban issue and a people of color issue. Obviously, I've lived that, and I'm the first Latino seat, and that matters to me. And obviously, I'm from Philadelphia.
Yeah.
The health and safety of Philadelphia matters to me a great deal. But I'm telling you, when I was out there for the train derailment, or when I was in Plum on Monday, those are environmental justice communities. They're poor, rural, vulnerable communities. There's the farmers all across Pennsylvania who are significantly impacted as well. They're the ones that have the abandoned wells on their property, the legacy abandoned wells, the more than roughly 400,000 to 500,000 of them that are out there from our legacy history here in Pennsylvania around wells and fracking and all of those issues. Those are where those communities are being impacted. Those are environmental justice communities as well. And when you're specifically impacted by something like a train derailment, like we saw out in Darlington, Pennsylvania, or an explosion like Plum, you are going to be categorized in environmental justice community in terms of how we're looking at that as an agency.
So what do you do?
So I've appointed for the first time ever here at DEP a special deputy secretary of environmental justice, Fernando Trevino, who's been incredibly active.
I remember. No. Yep.
Fernando's amazing, and Fernando has, at my request and the governor's request, that the governor has signed off and encouraged all of this. It's really a passion for him as well. We're going to have a coordinator on environmental justice, like I did with Philly Rising in our neighborhoods in Philly. We're going to have a coordinator in every single regional office across DEP. So I've got six regions across the entire state. We will have an environmental justice representative in each of those who is coordinating, not just engaging communities, but being embedded in those communities in a thoughtful way. You can't go in there after something happens and build trust. They have to know you. You have to be in that community. They have to know what you're about. You have to build that credibility before something happens so that you can go in there and build trust quickly and get work done around an emergency. So that's what we hope to do. So what you see our team doing right now is dealing with the community around the Shell cracker plant outside of Pittsburgh, where their violations have led to a significant fine and penalty, and that's the role DEP can play, where we fine them $10 million for their emissions violations. But I did something very different, John, that we had never done before. We got the most historic community fund created of $5 million, where we're letting the community, we create an advisory group, and the community is developing the protocol for how those dollars are spent. The money's just not coming to the general fund or coming to DEP. That $5 million is going back to that community to fund programs that specifically help remediate the damage that has occurred, including doing some independent air monitoring and testing, not on the fest line, not at the facility, not just outside the facility, but in the community itself. So those folks can monitor their air quality and know that and tell their children that they're safe as well. So we've never done that before here at DEP, and I hope that to be the model. So when I talk about environmental justice, I'm talking about bringing some environmental justice to that community where they get a say, where I use the power of this office here at DEP. And Governor Shapiro is all about empowering people's voices, right? That's what we're doing. If you got a voice, you're going to be heard here in Pennsylvania. That these folks get not just to speak up and complain about the folks like who are polluting our environment, but they actually get to be a part of the solution and making a difference to make it better.
I think that there's a cool part of justice. When I see the term environmental justice, it comes off as hard and punitive. And you just define the other avenue of it, which is the $5 billion for the community where they're solving, it's a very cool way to leave a situation. I love the fact that you describe yourself as someone who comes in and takes care of a situation. You get to do that now in a case-by-case basis. And so with that being said, look, from a personal side, it could be a very daunting, overwhelming position. What do you do to keep yourself at peace?
Oh boy, it's those moments. It's that phone call on Monday night with Detective Renko where I'm able to tell him that we're making a difference, and hearing the emotion in his voice. There was a moment, John, during that conversation where he couldn't speak, and I waited in order for us to be able to continue that conversation. There was a moment when I was there on Monday where he's telling me the story about what happened and the tragedy, including some graphic details that are not out there that I won't share. That where I wasn't asking him to tell me those stories, he needed to. He needed to tell me that story. He needed me to hear that from him. He was looking for me to help. That's where the energy comes from. It's the people like him that I am able to touch and make a difference and push. And our folks here at DEP, we need to live that every single day. When I was city manager and we were working on gun violence, I would always imagine that 12-year-old in the community who was watching the violence occur, seeing it when he went to school every day, that little girl watching it happen on the street corner. That's who you do it for, and that's where you draw your energy. My folks know, by the way, John, just to be a little self-deprecating, whenever I get cranky after a while because you're frustrated, you're not moving fast enough, things aren't working perfect all the time. And, and after all, this is government and it's got a big bureaucracy and there's a lot of frustration sometimes. They know that when I start to get cranky, they need to get me in front of some young people and get me touching to the lives of our young folks and talking to them about our environment and climate and how they can make a difference. And that's where I get my energy from. There are things that happen every day that are battery drainers. And when that happens, you need to go home and make sure you recharge your battery. But also you need to put things on your calendar that help recharge your battery where you're making a difference. And that goes for all of us. And it's really, really critical. I want to make sure I talk about climate, if you don't mind. So I wouldn't be a DEP secretary if I didn't send this important message, which folks really need to hear. When I talk about climate being the real existential threat of our time, here's what I'm talking about. And to your point, you said it really well. It's not about Hawaii. That's horrible and it's tragic. It's not really about the Canadian wildfires that have impacted us. Let me tell you about wildfires here in Pennsylvania, because this is a story that's not being told. And I've tried. I'm saying it almost everywhere I go. Mm-hmm. We have a rolling average here in Pennsylvania of over 600 wildfires in Pennsylvania every year. Generally, they're small. You don't hear too much about them. You generally hear about a handful of them every single year that happen to rise to a certain level of concern, and we talk about them. But that's a lot of fires. This year, we've had over 1,400 at the halfway point. 1,400. That's about
1,400 in June.
The problem there, and it's about things, and I'm going to tie it to the family that was literally ripped apart in Bucks County, where we lost those two children the Sealer family just a few months ago. We had, I issued a drought warning today out of DEP. That's one of the things we do.
Okay.
We do the air quality stuff too, which is so important. I'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
We had about 3 months of drought warning and a drought alert conditions. And then suddenly in about 4 or 5 days, had about 3 months worth of rain in those days. That's what's leading to both the worst of both scenarios. We've got drought conditions and then we have flash floods, right? Both of those things is what extreme weather looks like. That's what global warming does. The scientists will tell you that we're seeing disrupted weather patterns. We're seeing increased droughts. We're seeing increased flash floods. We're seeing lightning strikes like we've never seen that is impacting the airline community. So you're being impacted right now. If you're trying to book a flight somewhere, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be impacted in some way by some weather happening somewhere right now. That's what climate change looks like. On the air quality side, we have never had 4 days of statewide bad air quality above red here in Pennsylvania the way we had a few months ago. We have never hit pockets of purple throughout the entire state. We had never hit maroon. If you look at the color scheme, it's much like the Homeland Security kind of terror threat thing back from during 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
You're yellow, you're red, you're orange, you're purple, you're maroon. Maroon being the highest level of particulate matter actually in the air. We hit maroon for the first time ever in Pennsylvania history back a few months ago. That's never happened before. We have never before had 4 bad days of bad air quality across the entire state. That was some combination of Canadian wildfires and some combination of Pennsylvania wildfires and some combination of the bad air quality that we have here on a regular basis, and especially in areas where the topography is not great and there's an inversion like Pittsburgh, right, which happens regularly. So that's a huge issue. 3 weeks later, it happened again 3 days in a row, where that's never happened before.
Never happened twice in a matter of weeks.
Literally twice in a matter of weeks. When I was in Chicago, you talked about it. We had a storm called the Derecho that hit. That was 13 tornadoes hitting on the northern Illinois, and 13 tornadoes hitting in spots that is not tornado alley, that are spots that are not accustomed to having tornadoes, including one of them that went through the Rogers Park community in Chicago, northern Chicago. 4 miles across a major city in America, a tornado ripped through there. I walked the entire path of destruction. For you from Philadelphia, I swear, this is like a tornado touching down in North Philadelphia,
right,
and ripping across North Philadelphia for 4 miles until it hit the Delaware River. That's what happened. The tornado died out when it hit the Lake Michigan. Like that's never happened before. And look, John, we're seeing tornado warnings outside of Philadelphia, right? We're seeing it here in Pennsylvania for the first time. That's what climate change looks like here in Pennsylvania. So when we're talking about what we're doing to try to meet those obligations under Article 1, Section 27 around clean air, we've got to get
clean air.
We've got to get the methane out of our air. We've got a study coming out that talks about PFAS, one of those forever chemicals you keep hearing about, that contaminates our streams and our waters here in Pennsylvania. It's why in many places you really can't eat the fish. You really shouldn't eat some of the animals that folks are hunting. Make sure that you're really diligent about that. We put out advisories on all that stuff, but we need to improve and preserve our environment. And so to your point, I feel like I spend a lot of my time, I don't want to be the voice in the wilderness and kind of gloom and doom all the time. I legitimately believe, I'm not kidding, and I don't have a scientific basis for this, it's a gut, that the earth can heal itself if we do our part, that we underestimate the ability of our natural resources to turn all of this around. And I think that if we're able to do our part kind of across all sectors, the great story about Article 1, Section 27, John, they passed that 50 years ago. Not a single Democrat or Republican voted against it. Every member of both houses of our legislature stood up and said, we're going to grant environmental rights in Pennsylvania. They did that twice because it was a constitutional amendment. As you know, it's got to go through both House chambers twice. And then it went to a public referendum. It was one of the highest voting referendums in the history of Pennsylvania. People 4-1 voted for the Environmental Rights Amendment. We need that level a bipartisan commitment to impact the environment here in Pennsylvania. We need folks on the left, folks on the right. We need all of us. We all breathe the same air. We all drink the same water. We need to come together around this crisis, and it's happening to all of us.
So may I ask you, we need, and you can't refute anything that you said. The only things that I see, though, right now are the polars in regards to what has taken place. We need bipartisan support. Well, nobody's getting bipartisan support for much, not nothing, but not much. Individuals, I won't speak for everybody. I won't even speak for everybody, in my building. I'll just speak for me, which is the sense of overwhelm. You said a moment ago, right, that if we do our part, then the earth can heal itself. But we have to do our part, if I heard you correctly, right?
So I'm gonna make you feel better, John. We fight a lot. That gets a lot of coverage. That gets a lot of the noise.
Yeah.
On both sides. But look, President Biden, not by himself, but with a Republican-controlled Congress, was able to pass the Infrastructure Jobs Act, was able to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, right? Those are literally climate bills.
Okay.
More than half of those dollars are geared towards, and here I am in public service, John, and people for the first time in my entire career are throwing money at me. Right? When's that ever happened? Ever. They're taking money
what they're typically trying to do, right?
So I've got the state legislature across the street putting $210 million into improving the Chesapeake Bay. And I've got the chairman of the Chesapeake Bay Commission is a Republican, Senator Martin, who is the chair of the Appropriations Committee. Like, if we can't, and he's driving for the benefit of his community in Lancaster and those farmers, the quality of our streams in the Chesapeake Bay region. If we can't come together the way they did in Washington on both of those major bills, which are literally providing billions of dollars of funding that I can utilize. My job, the hard job, John, is making sure we're ready to spend those money because it's not a gift, right? That's our money coming back to us, right? We've paid our taxes. These are our federal dollars coming back to us to help clean up Pennsylvania. And Josh Shapiro is competitive as hell.
Well, the 5 situation would tell you
95, 12 days, right?
I mean,
He wants Pennsylvania to win. We're not just going to win with business and the economy and I-95. We're going to win on the environment.
Yeah,
he's going to make sure. He asks me every time I see him, Rich, how many wells have we kept? Like he cares about it. He knows that's a major source of methane for our folks, and I can tell you, because of him and because of what we've been doing, we've capped more than 75 wells in Pennsylvania that were spewing methane into the air. In the last 6 months, the previous 5 years, they had done 61 in 5 years. We've done 75 in just 6 months. And that's going to be accelerated. We're fighting hard on all of that stuff. So how do we do it? That's the way we do it.
Yeah. And it's making certain that those messages continue to get blown out into everywhere all the time, because that's the part. I didn't forget about the infrastructure bill. I'm not stupid, but I was going to say, but it does. It's kind of like, okay, that's great. All right, now, it's these long range plans that aren't terribly exciting, so to speak, in regards to infrastructure. Isn't. Tell me one more time, just so I get it. I love the way you said it. These are basically, and you said these are basically climate. Say it for me, so I get it.
They're not just climate bills, because more than half of the dollars in both categories, they're just as 40 grants. That's about environmental justice too, as well. But here's what they also are, John, which is really critical that folks haven't realized yet. In the past, I've been working with federal partners and federal dollars for a long time. I did it as a member in Philly, and you often talk about workforce development sort of later, right? They're talking about workforce development on the front end on both of those bills right now. So
Wow.
whether it's our pollution reduction bill that we're talking about right now. So here's the tie-in, and this is really pretty extraordinary. They're not just climate bills, like I just said. They're also workforce development bills. We're looking at good union jobs. We're looking at apprenticeships. We're looking at the opportunity. We need folks capping those wells. Every single coal miner who's out there working, and has a coal plant that is slowly going away needs to be retrained to help us cap the legacy abandoned well problem that we have in Pennsylvania. The governor's executive order, the first day in office, around not requiring four-year degrees, so that we can have technical schools and community college folks have a direct pipeline into the workforce and into state government. He issued an executive order just last week around workforce development that I'm talking about, that takes $400 million worth of those funds that we just talked about in those bills and helps folks with training and eliminate the barriers that we have to some of those training programs, because a lot of training programs are not paid for. Transportation is a huge challenge. Things like childcare and health benefits and all those things sometimes prevent people from being able to train and do those apprenticeships. So we're removing those hurdles in a way that the governor hopes is going to create 10,000 jobs. It's not just a climate bill, it's a jobs bill. And that's for Pennsylvania. That competitive governor wants to win. Like, we want more money than any other state. Those are competitive grants. We've got to do our job. My job is to get us ready. The Recovery Act bill under President Obama was about being shovel ready. Remember?
Oh yeah.
That's over. Today, it's about being people ready. If our workforce is not ready to go, if we're not people ready, if we don't have the infrastructure and the systems in place and the partnerships across both sides of the aisle to really put people to work here in Pennsylvania, then shame on us, and we're going to lose to states like Ohio and Virginia and New York. And I refuse to lose to those guys. We're going to bring every dime that we deserve back here to Pennsylvania.
That's just that alone. So you completely light up. So, by the way, you answered the question perfectly in what do you do to reignite yourself? I just watched you do it. And I just watched you literally light up when you were speaking, which is terribly exciting. So that you are not, you and the DEP team DEP, as you call it, the governor, that you're not working in silos. What do people that are listening today, what the hell do they do? Read up on this, vote, give money, like what the hell should, this is, look what they're doing. But this is
American democracy is not a bystander sport, right? It's you don't sit on the sidelines around the most important issues of our time. Yeah, we talked about a couple of them that I've lived, right? Whether it's voting rights, whether it's gun violence that we talked about a lot at the beginning, or whether certainly it's about your environment and what's happening in your community. John, it is ridiculous and a real shame for all of us as a community that it's 2023 and we still have lead in our schools, that we're still closing schools down because of asbestos and things of that nature. It's crazy. Like, people, what can they do? Get involved. There are groups all over the state. I can tell you because I interact with them. There are stakeholders, there are affinity groups. Get involved politically, vote on these issues. They matter. Understand where your folks are on the environment and on climate. That matters. Become fully engaged. But more importantly, just show up. It's really 90% of what it's about. My folks know there's no teleworking or being remote around making a difference in your community. You're not going to phone it in a community meeting. You need to show up, roll your sleeves up, and get to work. I try to do that as city manager, right? Everybody was shocked that I wanted to be in the communities, working alongside my folks. Like I'm going to be the same guy in this role, right? We're going to be out there and touching people's lives. They all need to do the same thing. That's what this is about: is showing up. And knowing and being accountable to yourselves and your neighbors. And just like that Navy SEAL story, right? The way that you'll get through stuff is by helping all those around you. And there's a lot of help that needs to go around.
So last question for the moment. You're a grandfather now, which, as I said, is amazing to me. Looking at you, man, you just don't look like a grandfather, but hell, I'll take your word for it.
I feel like one sometimes.
So you've got a young grandson. What would you instill in him in terms of, like, you got your whole life in front of you, but you got all these daunting situations, blah, blah, blah. Like what would you do? How would you?
I think it's the same thing I've done for my children. Like, one of the things I'm proudest about my kids is, John, my family, we lost a little girl, which I'll talk about, Abigail. She was 5 years old. We lost her to a terrible disease called spinal muscular atrophy. And I learned more from that little girl than I learned about strength, about joy, about capturing the moment, about making every single day count, about having and living a life of purpose and meaning. That's where I learned it, from that little girl. My dad's death and that circumstance taught me a lot about resilience, and taught me a lot about overcoming adversity and building community around you to get you through something like that. My daughter really taught me about that empathy for folks, and making the most out of our situation. So I want my grandson to get the message that my kids have, that is, it's not about you, dummy, it's about somebody else. And every time we make it about ourselves, sometimes I feel like we have different generations that can be sort of the look at me generation, right? That are fixated on all of that. It's important for us to tell our stories, but it's only because we want to tell our stories in a way that help and support someone else, not because we want to be Facebook famous or whatever that is, right? I mean, look at you. This podcast is barely about you, right? You're making me spill the beans on everything.
Some people should be less is more as it comes to me. Look, man, the whole reason it's great, good souls like you. The whole thing is this: it was very difficult for me to communicate at all. When even into my 30s, not even as a kid, as my 30s, I was the classic people pleaser, because I would hate to think that if I disagreed or challenged or did anything, don't know where the hell this came from. I had what I felt like was a normal upbringing, but it was like, but if I did, you'd run for me, beat me up, kick my butt, whatever it would be. And so I would shut down. One of the reasons I feel like when I ask people like that about like how you would, the messages you give to your family, your grandson, your kid, it's like that it's so important to me just to remind people that, yeah, as you just said, it's dumb. It's not about you. I shut down when it's about me. I really do. That's how I know it's about me, because I literally will shut down.
Yeah.
That's how I know that I have to do something, because I'll just go back to isolating, and freaking out. And that's one of the reasons. This whole point of this is that you bring people to walk the walk, like I said, because it's in part pulling me out, but anything that I can do that I get to pull people out, because I don't want people banging their head like I did. I don't want people, look, I came out, I was 42 years old. Which is nuts. And it's not like that many people were surprised. That was the really frustrating part. A lot of wasted energy, but that's whatever. But what I mean is, if I can help somebody get there a little bit faster, not bang your head quite as frequently, you know what I mean? Maybe take a little bit more of a direct route, then you do something by helping somebody. It helps me become braver. It helps me become more articulate, more compassionate, more on point. And Rich, it's feeling the energy coming from you. The showing up part is so right. I hate that we're doing this on Zoom, but hell, when you come to Philadelphia, I am absolutely putting my hand up to be on your dance card for a cup of coffee or something, because honestly, I think you're one of the coolest people that I've ever encountered. And for these global problems that feel so far away and removed, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for making them feel so close, so close and personal and on point. So, Rich Negrin, that's the best.
Well done. Close. Well done. Good job, John. It only took an hour, but you got it.
Thank you so much for joining me, man. You just made it incredible for me. I'm so thrilled that you made the time. Thank you, sir.
Anytime. Thanks, John.
Absolutely. And folks, you've just heard another episode of Your Message Received. We are thrilled. We will welcome you back. Keep liking, keep sharing, keep telling your friends and your family. Do something. I forgot the last question. Jeez. What's the best way to get to you, Rich?
Oh gosh, follow me on social media. I'm at Rich Negrin almost on every single platform. You know, I've always tried to be available to folks. So whether it's Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn, I'm not on Snapchat because my daughter won't let me go on there.
But the world of cat faces, no thanks. But I'll have these links, folks, so we'll make it easier to you to find Rich. As you now know, it's way more than a follow. It is an imperative. Folks, thanks so much for being here today. It's John Duffer from Duffin Media. Keep liking, loving, sharing, and we'll keep driving content to your front door. Have a great day, all. Be good. Bye.
And now, making its way across the finish line, Your Message Received has been a production of Duffin Media.
You know what you're doing here. Raise your right hand. Please repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Richard Negrin,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support, obey, and defend
that I will support, obey, and defend
the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania,
the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania,
and I will discharge the duties of my office
and I will discharge the duties of my office
with fidelity.
with fidelity.
Congratulations. You too. Let's take a photo here with Johnny. You stay right there.
Yeah.
You're good. Yeah.
Josh Holden.
Can I say that? Oh, I missed this.